let's say you have 5 levels of burning. Level 1 would be low intensity, so you're not feeling any discomfort in the legs. And then 2 flames would be zone 3. 3 to 4 flames would be zone 4, and then 4 to 5 flames would be zone 5. That's how I would think about it in terms of the burning. So zone 1, we'll go back all the way to the beginning. RPE 1, very, very easy effort. The easiest you can do, right? Typically, zone 1 isn't a huge part of somebody's training volume, right? It's going to be for people, I would say that zone 1 would be more for people that already train a lot and almost need to maintain a high volume of training, and taking a full day off might be counterproductive for them. And so in that case, introducing some active recovery, but it's typically going to be pretty short, 20 to 40 minutes typically. And again, 1 out of 10, and it could be a 20-minute easy bike ride. It could be a 20-minute jog, really easy jog if you're already competent in running in general. It could just be something where you do 5-10 minutes on the bike, then you get off and you do a bit of mobility or different activations, a little bit of core work, get back on the bike and do something like that. It's something, but again, really easy. 1 out of 10 should be the highest it goes in terms of difficulty. Okay. Now we go to zone 2. Zone 2, I would typically give between 2 and 3 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. Obviously, if you train for cycling event and you're doing 4 or 5 hour rides, it can go higher than 2 or 3. But in that context, the duration of the session makes the difficulty of the session. As in, I would count that session as one of the hard sessions of the week, right? I wouldn't just do a 4-hour ride and say, but it's low intensity, so it's easy. No, it's going to take you a couple of days to recover, especially if you're not used to it, right? But typically for that low intensity, it could go anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes at that 2 to 3 RPE. So for me, like I said, based on my numbers, I would sit around 120 watts, typically a little bit below my first threshold. There's no point in being on top of it. Just give yourself some margin, which just means you're going to be able to do more. And more is the name of the game when we're below the second threshold. And we'll come back to that with zone 3 and zone 4. Oftentimes we do those sessions and we want to make them harder to progress. No, just make them longer. Because if you go harder, soon enough, you're going to go above that second threshold. Now we're not doing the same kind of work anymore. So think about extensifying sessions when you're below the second threshold. So again, zone 2 could be 20 minutes for somebody's beginning, could be 40 minutes, could be an hour, could be multiple hours if you're training in an endurance sport, or you're in a phase where you need to develop that base endurance to a high degree. Then we go to zone 3. And zone 3, zone 4 is where we're going to typically start to see intervals come in, right? And what I would use typically for intervals in terms of work to rest ratios would be 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. I think that's the easiest way to think about and structure zone 3 and zone 4 training. Typically, zone 3, I would say RPE 4 to 5, maybe bordering onto 6 when it's a really big session towards the end of a progression, for example. I'll give some examples just after. And then zone 4 is going to be more in the 6 to 7 range. So again, it's a sustained effort. 7 is not easy, but you're still in control and it's still sustainable, right? That's the most important thing to remember. And if you have a good experience in training and if you can listen to yourself, you'll know when you go from medium intensity to high intensity. You'll know when you go from something that's hard but sustained and then something that goes into, oh, okay, we've really gone up a notch and I'm not going to last very long here, right? Mm-hmm. That is the transition of that second threshold. Now, when it comes to the formats, I like to use a very simple framework for those zone 3 and zone 4 sessions. And since we're on that 4 units of work for 1 unit of rest, you could do, for example, 2 to 3 times 8 minutes on, 2 minutes off at an RPE of 5. That's a very basic zone 3 sessions to start with, right? So think of the total work that you did. It's going to be between 16 and 24 minutes. But we did that 2 to 3 intervals, 8 minutes in zone 3, and then 2 minutes either passive rest or active rest in zone 2, depending on what you're doing. If you're cycling, it's easy to just drop the resistance and then spin in zone 2 for a couple minutes and then get back into your next interval. If you're running, you might want to just stop and walk at the beginning. And then as you progress, you can actually use active recovery in between those 8 minutes to increase the load of the session a little bit. Because obviously it's going to be a little bit harder if you keep running for those 2 minutes, even if you run more slowly, right? And typically, I would say that when we compare cycling sessions and biking and running sessions, I would typically prescribe a bit more volume off the bat on the bike. With the run, I would be a bit more on the conservative side. So for three times 8 minutes that I would put on the bike, I might do 2 times 6 minutes with 130 rest on the run for the same level person, for example. And then you can progress that all the way to 3 times 20 minutes over time, for example, on the bike, and all the way up to 3 times 12, 3 times 15 on the run. Again, because the run has that structural load component that you have to be able to tolerate. And that would be one of the big distinctions I make between planning on the bike and planning on the run. The run, I would always respect the intensity on the progressive standpoint, meaning I would start with low intensity. I would go towards zone 3. I would go towards zone 4. I would go towards zone 5. And then I would go into the even faster stuff. On the bike, you can take somebody new and get them to sprint on the bike within a few training sessions. Maybe even the first training session, you could say, okay, drop the resistance, spin your legs as fast as you can. Boom, you have a sprint, very little risk, no problem. But you don't get a beginner that's never run to go and do 30-meter sprints, right? That's a recipe for disaster. So yeah. I think progressing the intensity very diligently and conservatively with the run is super important if you want to avoid injuries. Okay.
Yeah. One question on the run. Sorry, just interrupt on the bike, it's obviously easy to prescribe watts. How are you prescribing intensity on the run? Are you doing 6 minutes at a speed, or are you doing
good question
distance?
If you've done some kind of test to figure out what is low, what is medium, what is high intensity for you on the run, then you would use that. Otherwise, I would just go by feel, and I would stick with 4 to 5 out of 10. So concretely, what does that mean? You're going to start to feel a bit of tingling in the legs. Your breathing is going to start to feel a little bit heavier, but you can still make sentences, right? And then the distinction when we go up to zone 4 is that your legs are going to burn more clearly, okay? It's like going, if you have, let's say you have 5 levels of burning. Level 1 would be low intensity, so you're not feeling any discomfort in the legs. And then 2 flames would be zone 3. 3 to 4 flames would be zone 4, and then 4 to 5 flames would be zone 5. So that's how I would think about it in terms of the burning sensation. So when we go up to zone 4, it's going to go up a notch in terms of the burning. It's going to go up a notch in terms of how difficult it is to breathe, but again, it's still going to be manageable. And here what we can do is simply cut the intervals a little bit shorter than what we did in zone 3, because again, physiologically speaking, zone 3, zone 4 is the same effect on the body. It's just that one is a bit more intense than the other, right? So for the threshold sessions, I might start with 6 minutes on the bike, but only 4 minutes on the run. So you could do a 3 times 6 with 1 minute 30 rest on the bike, and you could do 3 times 4 with 1 minute rest on the run. That would be a good starting point, and then we can progress that up towards a good session for somebody who's trained a while. On the bike, we might go to 4 times 8, 4 times 10 minutes, right? So that's going to be an RPE of 7. For me, threshold 2 is at 240, so I would probably do those sessions around 220, 225. Again, keeping a little bit of a margin, because I'd rather do more intervals than just go a little bit too fast and then dip into the high intensity. And just to be clear, nothing bad's going to happen if you go a little bit too high, right? It's just about, okay, we're trying to accumulate a certain amount of work in a certain intensity domain, and then we're going to try and do that over multiple weeks. And then it's the total amount of work that you do that's going to be productive, right? And that is what you have to aim for, is consistency and total volume that you build up, rather than just one crazy session that's going to, because you saw it on Instagram and you wanted to do what the champs do, right? It's the consistency over time that everybody overlooks, but that's the real driver of results. And so again, on the RPE, probably 6 to 7 on those sessions. So to give a very concrete example, if we're programming on the bike, and I'm starting a phase where I did maybe 3-4 weeks of tempo sessions. So I did a 3x8, and then I did a 3x10, and then I did a 2x12, and then I did a 2x12 plus 1 times 8, something like that. just building up slowly. And I kept the same intensity, right? So, but the RPE went from 4 to 5 over those sessions because it got a little bit longer, got a little bit, more difficult. And then once I did that for 3 to 4 weeks, now I can bump it up to threshold, right? I'm still in that medium intensity bracket. I'm just moving from the bottom. I built the foundation. Now I can go and do my threshold better. And so now I might just, again, pull the duration of those intervals back again and start with a 2 or 3 by 6 if I'm on the bike. And then I would go to 2 to 3 by 8. And then I might go to, I don't know, I could do a 10, 8, 6, 4. Right? You could do whatever you want in terms of the format, but it's always asking yourself, what are you trying to achieve with that session? What's the target intensity? And in that case, we're trying to build time just under the second threshold because we're going to obviously help the slow and the fast twitch fibers in terms of sustaining effort. We're going to help build all those transporters that help reuse all the metabolites from the fast twitch to the slow twitch fibers. And that's especially important for all the high intensity sports like CrossFit, like team sports, because you need to be able to go hard and you need to be able to recover. Yeah. And if you only have the fast twitch side or the high intensity side that's been developed, you're lacking the tank on the back end to help you recycle all the stuff that you're producing. And if you can recycle better, guess what? You can go harder, you can go longer, and you can be ready again sooner for your next effort. So that's where medium intensity, which is not specific to CrossFit, if we keep that example, is very useful from a physiological standpoint for high intensity efforts because it will allow you to do more and recover faster from it, right? If we think of that tap, and once you get to that second threshold, you've fully opened the tap and you've maxed it out. Well, by doing those tempo and threshold sessions, we're going to make the tap even bigger and be able to have more of that oxygen that comes in and better delivery so that we can sustain those higher intensity efforts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense. One question on the interval duration. Given the goal is to be sustainable, is it harder to know that it's sustainable if you're doing a 10-8-6-4 because the shorter duration is going to trick you into pushing harder? But is that okay?
Don't get tricked.
Okay.
Stick with and that's why I kind of put it at the end of the progression. I would do the other ones first, and I would stick with the same intensity. I wouldn't start playing with the intensity on those. I would stick with the same, right? Okay. You could do it the other way. You could do a 4, 6, 8, 10 as well. And that's now the coach that comes into play and decides, okay, what am I trying to achieve? Who's my athlete? Does he or her do better with that format or that progression? Is it better to go from longer to shorter or from shorter to longer? And again, that those are all levers that you can play with based on what you're trying to do with the session. Okay. Right. Before I go into the high intensity, to give a bit of extra context, we can play with those durations and those rest intervals to a quite large extent. Meaning, for example, if you take a pretty famous session is this 25 by 400 on 30 seconds or a 1 minute rest, which is the Norwegian threshold, right? And so if we think of...
Ingebrigtsen loves that, doesn't he?
Exactly. So if we think of the context of that session, so you're running 400s, which you're going to run pretty fast, but then it's called threshold. So what's the deal? And what's interesting with that session, it really illustrates how you can be in two different domains at the same time. What I mean by that is that from a speed standpoint, mechanically speaking, from an output standpoint, you're running at high intensity. You're running above your second physiological threshold, right? So I could do those on the bike and you could convert them into time. So it could be like a minute 30 on and 30 seconds off. And I could do that 15 times and that would be a good Norwegian threshold session, right? And if we go back to my numbers, so what did we say, 230 on the second threshold, but I would do those at maybe 250 or 260, right? So mechanically speaking, I'm above my second threshold. But because the intervals are pretty short and we're sticking with that 4-to-1 or 3-to-1 work to rest ratio, if I measured my lactate throughout the session, it would stay nice and stable. So from an output standpoint, from an external load standpoint, I'm at high intensity on paper, but from an internal load standpoint, I'm at medium intensity. So that would be a fantastic session when you're progressing somebody up with running, for example, and they've done the low intensity, they've done the tempo, they've done the threshold, and you want to move them into the high intensity bucket, but they're not quite ready to run fast for long periods of time. So we can move them in that middle ground of that Norwegian threshold, which is faster in terms of running speed than if you did just a basic threshold session, but it stays manageable from a metabolic standpoint, from an internal standpoint, right? And you can play to an infinite degree with those work rest ratios and those durations, but you also always have to be clear on what the goal of that session is, right? And obviously for the Norwegians that run, the 1500, the 3K and all those things, well, they're going to be running fast during those races. So having sessions that are metabolically controlled, that medium intensity, but where you run faster than if you were just running straight 8 or 10 minutes is interesting for them because it's more time spent at a faster speed.
Yeah.
While not costing the body too much because we're still at medium intensity. We're not at high intensity. And you can also do more volume, right? You couldn't, most people, all other things being equal, you wouldn't do 25 400s at high intensity. Yeah, but Zatopek did. Yeah, sure. But the point is, most people, 99% of people, wouldn't do that amount of volume at high intensity just because your body's going to give out before you get to the end of those. But you can do it if you control that intensity a little bit better and you're actually staying at medium intensity on the systemic side.